I think we are moving from that hypothetical to a real deployment model because people talk about concepts and, hey, this would be great and the industry will scale. Now, when it moves from that hypothetical or just theoretical stuff to actually becoming a regulation and rule going into effect, it's becoming a reality. So you can see the light at the end of the tunnel versus not knowing where we're going to head and when the light will come up.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 384. What does Europe's U-Space protocol for uncrewed systems mean for BVLOS operations? For that question, we head to Washington, D.C. to speak with Amit Ganjoo, CEO and founder of ANRA Technologies. ANRA Technologies is an award-winning drone operations and UAS traffic management platform provider. The company's SmartSkies platform is used by multiple commercial and government entities for running and managing commercial drone operations. Amit has over 20 years of aviation, telecom, and wireless experience in both the federal and commercial space. He is an engineer, a licensed pilot, following a lifelong passion in aviation, and builds experimental aircrafts. He is a board member of the Global UTM Association that supports the accelerated and transparent implementation of globally interoperable UTM systems. He is also a member of the FAA's UTM Drone Advisory Committee Working Group and co-chaired the working group that developed the ASTM standard specification for UAS traffic management and service supplier interoperability. Amit's engagement with drone programs for the U.S. Department of Defense motivated him to establish ANRA so he could address the growing need for unmanned systems to be safely integrated into existing air systems. ANRA launched their UTM platform in 2015 and has been collaborating and working alongside stakeholders and clients ever since. The company was selected as the Airspace Partner for NASA's Advanced Air Mobility National Campaign and is the technology provider for the Future of Flight initiative in the United Kingdom. On January 26, 2023, Europe will implement a new uncrewed airspace regulatory framework called the U-Space Framework. U-Space is a set of specific services and procedures designed to ensure safe and efficient access to airspace for a large number of drones, and which are based on high levels of digitalization and automation. The purpose of U-Space is to achieve automated UAS management and integration, allowing for a large series of operations, many of them even simultaneous, and all of this in harmonious coexistence with the current ATM system. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Amit provides an overview of the U-Space framework, the impact it will have on BVLOS flights, and the potential lessons and applications here in North America. But before we hear from Amit, I want to thank those of you who have been supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the costs of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. Now let's get some insights into the European U-Space regulatory framework with Amit Ganjoo of ANRA Technologies. Let's pick up the interview where I ask Amit to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Amit Ganjoo. I'm the founder and CEO of ANRA Technologies. We are an airspace and mission management company with 4 global locations in North America, US, UK, Europe, and Asia. We've been in this space since 2015. doing stuff what people sometimes loosely call USpace or UTM or UAM traffic management or provider of services for UAM. We do a lot more than that, but those are some of the foundational elements and terms people are more used to.
Amit, what makes ANRA Technologies stand out among other UTM providers?
We are not outsiders trying to come into the industry. We come at this from an inside-out perspective. So we are not just a technology company building the technology. We are someone who's actually working on taking a three-pronged approach. So we work on the regulatory side, we work on the standard side, and the technology side. So obviously, technology part is pretty straightforward to understand. But outside of that, we focus on the regulatory aspects. So we sit on the various aviation rulemaking committees, whether it's in US with FAA ARC or the Aviation Advisory Council or similar stuff in UK or Australia or in other parts of the world. So we are helping influence and define some of the regulatory requirements, which eventually come out as regulations, which the industry will have to comply with to actually operate in this space and ensure that we have safe integration of these uncrewed aircraft into each national airspace system. In addition to the regulatory side, another key important aspect is the standards. So in that three-pronged approach, we also support the various standards organizations, whether it's ASTM, EuroK, ISO, and not just support, we are actively involved in that. So I personally co-chair the ASTM F38 standards group that has published the only known standards for UTM interoperability and remote identification. Similarly, we support the EuroK working groups as well as some of the ISO work going on as well.
On January 26, 2023, Europe will begin implementing a new uncrewed airspace regulatory framework called the USpace Framework. Amit, can you give us an overview of the framework?
What's going on in Europe is there's something called the USpace regulatory framework that was outlined over the past many months, and now it's going into effect in January. So 26 January 2023, that regulation actually goes into effect and people have to start complying with. It's called the USpace regulatory framework, and it actually covers three different regulations, which is 2021 664, 2021 665, and 2021 666. And they focus on different aspects ranging from the regulatory framework for USpace to requirements for ATM and air navigation service provider functions when operating in a USpace airspace designated, when it's in a controlled airspace, and also requirements for crewed or manned aviation, formerly called manned aviation, when these aircraft are operating in these new USpace airspaces that are defined by these member states. So these regulations actually, like I mentioned, go into effect in January here, so coming up soon. They also establish the requirements for how do you designate the airspace, the performance requirements, certification requirements, so who can offer services there, procedures and the responsibilities for different stakeholders, whether those be service providers, actual drone operators, or the air navigation service providers, or crewed aviators in that aspect.
What do the regulations cover?
The framework provides the guideline and the framework within which the member states go in and define those USpace airspaces, and then how you operate and offer services in those USpace airspaces is what the regulatory framework touches on, and ranging from how do you provision it, how do you certify services being offered there, et cetera, et cetera. For the core tenet of this regulation is primarily to lay down the rules and procedures for safe operations and integration of UAS into the USpace airspace. And how do we do that while taking into account the existing aviation system and without disrupting? And this new framework has certain key tenets it follows, right? It has to factor in safety, security, privacy, as well as environmental considerations. So those are the guiding principles as this regulation was put in place.
Are there specific criteria or standards for operations? Or are they more like guidelines when it comes down to how things will actually play out?
I think it's a combination, and there's guidance material and means of compliance that have been defined by EASA and others as to how can you comply with such regulations. So in some cases, it's going to be very specific. In other cases, there may be some leeway. And in many cases, in addition to the top European EASA level guidance, you will also have member states. Each member states can have their own additional requirements that may get imposed as well.
Perhaps one of the bigger questions is how will the framework support BVLOS operations?
The new regulation will determine the services that need to be in place to allow safe operations. So there are 4 core services, use-based services, and 2 optional services that have been identified, plus something called a common information service. So it's a combination of those. They will need to be deployed in one shape or form to allow US operations in general and beyond visual line of sight operations as well. So these will help determine like performance requirements to, for example, to operate in a use-based airspace, and what is the digital exchange of information that needs to happen between the relevant stakeholders in the system as well.
You mentioned a provision related to the integration of uncrewed systems with traditional manned flight operations. How is that going to be handled?
There's this concept of something called CIS, Common Information Service, and there is the framework actually helps define the requirements for crewed aviation when they are operating in use-based airspace. If they're not operating in use-based airspace, then it's less of a risk. But one of the key paradigms there is that you need to be conspicuous, like e-conspicuous. That means we can identify you, know you are there, so other actors in the airspace know what's happening and can plan around it and have the situational awareness. There's going to be between ATM, UTM integration from a legacy ATM point of view or the air navigation service provider point of view. We have to look at aspects like coordination procedures, exchange of information, and some cases like when a crewed aircraft is going to transit, say, an use-based airspace, there may be dynamic airspace reconfiguration that's required as well. And how that gets communicated are some of the aspects that will be handled as well. And the CIS, which is the Common Information Service, in some of the cases, it's a high-level concept, and different member states may decide what functionality is included in the CIS function. But at a minimum, it will have like some of the authoritative data sources, constrained information that may get pushed towards what's called the use-based service providers or USSPs as well. There's some new digital exchanges that will need to happen, especially in areas where these crewed and uncrewed aircraft are not segregated. They are operating in the same airspace. So it's awareness on both sides. The uncrewed operators need to know what crewed traffic is there, and crewed traffic needs to be aware of what uncrewed traffic is in the same airspace. But if they're operating in areas which are segregated, there, like there's no crewed aircraft in the use-based airspace and they're outside of the control zone, then maybe it's less of a consideration there. But when they're operating in the same airspace, like a controlled airspace, yes, it becomes even more important.
What's the mood in Europe regarding new space? Any hesitancy or resistance of some of the new requirements?
In Europe, it's kind of already a done deal. The regulation regulatory framework has been built. It's becoming a law in January. So I think everyone has kind of reconciled to the fact this is happening, this is coming. It's not like in other parts of the world, like US, where there are still debates going on how we'll do it and where we'll do it and what are the requirements and stuff like that. So from that point of view, Europe is leading the charge right now.
How do you think these changes will drive the industry forward? And which areas do you think will see the initial growth?
With the framework falling in place, there are new roles, new entrants being defined into the system, like the concept of USSP or use-based service provider and CISP. And there are new operational and performance requirements, right? So this opens up new business models and new potential revenue streams. And these things will evolve over a period of time. I don't think anyone has a crystal ball to give you a clear answer, but it does open up opportunities. And it's expected that with this new use-based airspace designation, initially it will be prioritized in certain areas where safety, security, and privacy are of key importance. So it'll gradually start evolving from there. So we may have certain areas where there'll be U-space, airspace, and then over the next few years, it'll start expanding in a more broader across the member state or across the whole geography per se.
How will U-space differentiate between urban, suburban, and rural areas, or areas with varying airspace and ground population characteristics?
It depends on the member states. Member states are the one that have to define these initial use space. So initially, I believe the use space airspaces might be in less dense, lower risk areas, and then they'll expand to all areas. So given your example, I can't specifically comment what the French state will do in this case and how they may define it. But eventually, yeah, the use spaces will be in rural, suburban, but they can be in urban areas as well. Because keep in mind, down the line, we'll have all kinds of even AM, operations, and they will happen in urban areas as well. So I think from that point of view, it will be across. But keep in mind, there will be use spaces in controlled airspaces too. So where there's a lot of traffic, like around airports and stuff like that. And that's what I was talking about earlier. So that's why this digital exchange between crewed and uncrewed, because if all the use spaces are in remote rural areas, there's no need for an integration because you're pretty much kind of operating in a segregated space. But you will have use space and crewed air traffic interacting when you're in controlled airspaces or manned aircraft is transiting a U-space airspace. So those interactions will happen. I don't think we can necessarily generalize one way or the other.
How do you think the U-space framework will influence the UTM system being developed in the United States?
I hope it's used as a potential model. It doesn't necessarily line up one-to-one, and that's what FAA will say as well. But there are a lot of concepts and services that have been defined there that I think translate very well, no matter where US operations are happening. So I think there are good lessons to be learned from there and incorporated in the US paradigm as we move forward and we help define a regulatory framework. It's not necessarily a mirroring of the concept, but it's taking the concepts that can translate and then adding new concepts that might be unique to our geography here.
What do U.S. companies doing business in Europe, or thinking about it, need to know to serve the market effectively and in compliance?
So it depends on what that U.S. company's business area is. So at a conceptual point of view, if someone wants to become a USSP or a CISP, so they have to be certified by the relevant competent authority like EASA or the member state and comply with all these requirements, which deal with management systems, occurrence reporting, business, emergency contingency plans, et cetera. So that's for the use-based service providers, and they have to get certified. But if someone, a service provider or an operator who just wants to go fly operations and maybe sell drones or provide a service to a customer in Europe, if they're operating in a use-based airspace, they would need to sign up for service from a certified USSP, especially if they're operating in the area which has been designated as a use-based airspace. So they are actually in compliance with the rules and regulations.
What excites you about the implementation of U-Space?
I think we are moving from that hypothetical to a real deployment model because people talk about concepts and, hey, this would be great and the industry will scale. Now, when it moves from that hypothetical or just theoretical stuff to actually becoming a regulation and rule going into effect, it's becoming a reality. So you can see the light at the end of the tunnel versus not knowing where we're going to head and when the light will come up. So we're really excited from that point of view because we believe this is one of the main key gatekeepers. And with this, granted that the regulation is not going to be perfect day one, and it's going to evolve over a period of time. But this gives us a stepping stone to head in the right direction. Whereas in other cases, we don't really have a stepping stone. We're trying to step in different directions until we realize which direction is the right one.
How does ANRA Technologies fit into the rollout of U-Space?
For us, we are a technology provider. We license our technology. So we have a full-blown, all the core use-based services and the optional ones. We have those available. We can license them to other people who want to be USSPs, and we will have a certified USSP stack as well, hopefully, as things continue to move forward. And in addition to that USSP, we have some CISP services as well. So whether it's air navigation service providers that are trying to now offer USSP services or enhanced CISP services, we have all the building blocks available, which have been trialed and tested over the past many years, and they comply with all these regulations as well. So I think we'd love to work with the right partners in the European segment. We have many, but I think there are plenty of other opportunities to expand our partnerships and collaborations.
And for my final question, Amit, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
The drones are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. Yeah, sometimes it seems like the hype curve doesn't do the industry a favor. Like some people get carried away with the hype curve. But again, this is the aviation industry. Safety is highly critical. So things may not move at the pace we want them to move, but they are moving in the right direction. And this regulatory framework is a great example of that. So just hang in there like we have. And I think there's light at the end of the tunnel.
That's it for episode 384 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Amit Ganjoo of ANRA Technologies. I want to thank Amit for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about ANRA Technologies or want to connect with Amit, check out the webpage at anratechnologies.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.